the Sterling Corporation, who supports, opposes, and is neutral on these resolutions. This should be good.
Madam Chair and members of the
coming.
committee, thank you for the invitation to give you a little historical analysis of the term limit issue. I understand my friend Bill Ballinger was here yesterday. I hope I don't repeat some of the same things. I think we have to put Michigan into context as part of a national term limit movement that lasted just one decade. It began in 1990 in Oklahoma and California, spread through the states that provide for the initiative constitutional amendments of their state legislature during the 90s, and the last state to actually adopt legislative term limits was in Nebraska in 2000. Every state that permits their state constitution to be amended by initiative petition adopted term limits. No states have adopted term limits since 2000. Today, just 15 states still have state legislative term limits. 4 states had them thrown out by their state Supreme Court in litigation: Massachusetts, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. And 2 states who adopted state legislative term limits by statute, not by constitutional amendment, a subsequent legislature decided that that wasn't a hot idea and repealed state legislative term limits in Utah and Idaho. Michigan adopted term limits in 1992, as Patrick Anderson explained to you, and it was on the ballot as Proposal B. It passed with about 58% of the yes vote. Patrick and I disagree on one thing. I don't remember a whole lot of money being spent against this proposal. There wasn't a whole lot of money spent in favor of the proposal either. It was just one of those proposals that was added to the Constitution, I think, with frankly not that much debate. Term limits at that time consisted of 3 things. It consisted of state legislative term limits. It had term limits for our state constitutional officers, and ended the era where Bill Milliken could serve 14 years, or a Soapy Williams or a John Engler 12. Jim Hare and Richard Austin spent 26 years and then 24 years as Michigan Secretary of State. And of course, the Attorney General, Frank Kelly, served 37 years as Attorney General from 1961 to 1998. The amendment, as I indicated, was intended to limit service by Michigan lawmakers in the U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives. And I remember talking to Patrick at the time, and I said, why would you want to unilaterally disarm and have every state, besides those states that amend their state constitution, limit a member of Congress to 12 years in any 24-year period? Obviously, John Dingell had almost a 60-year career. John Conyers has been in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1964. Now, Carl Levin is our longest serving United States Senator, and his service, of course, extended from 1978 to 2014. Fortunately, I think the United States Supreme Court said, no, a state constitution can't basically impose the limits on who can get elected to the U.S. House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, and declared that unconstitutional in a similar constitutional amendment adopted by the people of Missouri back in 1995. Now, I would like to stress this emphatically. State legislative term limits across the nation are not created equal. Of those 15 states that have state legislative term limits, most of those states, these are merely limits on legislators serving consecutive terms. Ohio, our neighbor to the south, is one of those states that adopted term limits. You can serve, I think, 8 years in the state house, and then you can run for the Senate. Or you can sit out a period of time and go back and run for the House, and do this over over a rather extensive period of time. So 9 of the 15 states that still have state legislative term limits, these are limits on consecutive terms. And that's the one I guess I was neutral on. Michigan is only one of 6 states where the limit on terms is a lifetime limit. 6 of those states adopted that when they adopted term limits: California, Arkansas, Michigan, and then Nevada, Missouri, Oklahoma were the additional 3 states that adopted lifetime limits. Interestingly enough, back in 1990, when Oklahoma adopted lifetime limits, they said you could serve 12 years in the Oklahoma legislature, and you could serve all 12 in the House or all 12 in the Senate, or a combination thereof. In Nevada, when they adopted state legislative term limits, they said you could serve 12 years in the House and 12 years in the Senate, and frankly, that didn't seem to impose any real problem. But 3 states adopted what I call the most draconian state legislative term limits: Michigan, California, and Arkansas. And they limited legislators in the State House of Representatives, or in California to the State Assembly, to 3 2-year terms, and then in the Senate 2 4-year terms in the State Senate, for a combined service in both legislative chambers of 14 years. Now, today, Michigan alone has the most draconian state legislative term limits. In California, in 2012, the voters of the state of California amended their state constitution to allow a state legislator to spend all 12 years of a lifetime limit, down from the previous 14, in either the Assembly or the Senate, or a combination of the 2. In 2014, Arkansas, the voters of the state of Arkansas, amended their constitution similar to California's change, except they increased the lifetime limit from 14-year total to 16 years. And all 16 years can be spent in either the State House or the State Senate, or a combination of the 2. And so the next most draconian state after Michigan is Missouri. You can serve 8 years in the State House, in Missouri, 8 years in the State Senate. So I think you can see that Michigan is far out of the mainstream as far as state legislative term limits are concerned in those 15 states that actually do in fact have state legislative term limits. Now, I'll conclude by just asking some questions, and that is what to expect to see changed in California and the Arkansas legislature with those term limit changes, allowing a legislator to serve all 16 years or all 12 years in one legislative chamber, or in a combination of the 2. In my judgment, legislators will gain more experience before achieving leadership positions. Second, legislators will be less likely to chair committees in their first term in the state legislature. Leadership ladders, which were once common, may in fact return. Only after serving as few terms on a committee and demonstrating knowledge and leadership will a legislator receive a position of committee chair. Legislators may be around long enough to acquire specialized expertise on issues that they did not have before they were first elected to the legislature. Freshman legislators will not be out organizing campaigns for leadership positions during their first term in the State House of Representatives, and no one will likely be elected speaker out in California and Arkansas after only serving 2 years in the lower house. Lawmakers may be less inclined to plot as aggressively their path to that next office in their career. Senior lawmakers may be more inclined to mentor newer members, and the seemingly unquenchable demand to raise campaign dollars for leadership races and that next office may in fact be less. In sum, I think by extending service to just one chamber, will change the legislature organization, leadership, and the culture of that particular chamber as well. So with that, Madam Chair, I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. I just have one question, and it was a question I asked Rep. McBroom as well. How do we, with the popularity of term limits among the people, yet how do you balance that with going in and making changes that we feel could potentially reduce or mitigate the negative or unintended consequences of the.
I think states are the laboratory of democracy. And if they could do it in California and they can do it in Arkansas, states that just aren't exactly similar, okay, and convince the voters in those two states that basically, hey, this idea of 3 two-year terms in the state house is a crazy idea. And so, they basically, have 12 in California and 16 now. And so some people will serve in the state house, some people will serve in the state senate for that entire period of time. Some will have a combination of the two. But I guess in answer to your question, I think you can start out with a rational explanation of why 3 two-year terms is not a good idea, and why using this California or Arkansas model is frankly far superior to what we have now in Michigan.
Thank you. The California, and I think it was Arkansas, that did changes similar to what Michigan's term limits were, but have since gone back and reformed theirs. That was done via petition drive.
No, it wasn't.
Or was that put on the legislative?
In neither state, the state legislature actually put those 2 questions on the ballot. Okay. And they were both approved by the voters.
So those were legislatively placed on the ballot?
Yeah, it would be like today passing a House Joint Resolution and getting a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate. That's exactly what happened in both California and Arkansas.
Thank you. No further questions. Appreciate your
thank you.
time. Thanks, Bob.